The sun was just beginning to set over the quiet suburban neighborhood when Jack received the letter. He stood on his porch, sipping his coffee as he tore open the envelope from the Oak Ridge Heights HOA, the most obnoxious, power-hungry homeowners association he had ever dealt with. As he unfolded the paper, his eyes narrowed. Notice of dues increase. Effective immediately, your monthly HOA fees will be increased by 500% to account for necessary community improvements and administrative costs. Jack blinked. 500%. His usual $200 fee had just jumped to $1,000 a month. For what? The same over-manicured lawns, the same pointless street decorations, and the same group of smug HOA board members who seemed to think they were running a private kingdom. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't just absurd, it was highway robbery. And he had a pretty good idea of who was behind it. Corinne Sterling, the HOA president, had been running the neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom for years. She was the type of woman who threw fines at people for leaving their trash cans out 2 minutes too long. The type who patrolled the streets in a golf cart, clipboard in hand, looking for violations. Jack had clashed with her before, but this was a declaration of war. He glanced down the street at the HOA's pristine clubhouse, where Corinne and her board members held their ridiculous meetings. What they didn't seem to realize, or had stupidly forgotten, was that Jack owned the private substation that supplied power to the entire neighborhood, including the HOA office and clubhouse. Jack smirked. If they wanted to play dirty, he was about to show them what real power looked like. Jack didn't waste any time. If the HOA thought they could squeeze him for money, they were about to learn a painful lesson in consequences. That night, he went through his old records, official documents proving that he, not the HOA, owned the small private substation that powered their fancy little community. Decades ago, when the neighborhood was first developed, Jack's grandfather had leased the land to the builders under the condition that power to the community would flow through a privately owned substation, which had remained in Jack's family ever since. Over the years, the HOA never bothered to check who actually controlled their power supply. They just assumed the electric company handled everything. They paid a flat fee each month, which Jack's business used to maintain the substation and keep everything running smoothly. But now they wanted to bleed him dry. Jack chuckled as he pulled up the agreement on his computer. The contract was crystal clear. The HOA had no direct control over the substation. Any violation of agreed terms allowed the owner to terminate service. The contract was still active. Jack grinned. They wanted to rob him blind? Fine, but they were going to have to do it in the dark. The next morning, before sunrise, Jack made a quick trip to the substation. He checked the backup generator, just for himself, of course, and then flipped the switch that disconnected power to the entire HOA-controlled neighborhood. Then he went home, made a fresh pot of coffee, and waited for the chaos to begin. It started just after 6:00 a.m. Jack sat on his porch, sipping his coffee as the first signs of panic spread through the neighborhood. One by one, porch lights flickered off, air conditioning units powered down, and morning alarms failed to go off. Within minutes, people were stumbling outside in confusion, phones in hand, trying to figure out what had happened. And then came the real show. Corinne Sterling, in her usual pearl necklace and perfectly pressed blazer, stormed out of her house, phone pressed to her ear. Even from his porch, Jack could hear her snapping orders to whoever was unlucky enough to be on the other end of the call. I don't care what the electric company says. This is a gated community. We pay premium rates for uninterrupted service. Find out why our power is out and fix it. Jack smirked. Oh, this was going to be fun. By 8:00 a.m., the entire neighborhood was in full meltdown mode. Residents were sweating in their powerless mansions, fanning themselves with HOA newsletters. Luxury electric cars sat useless in driveways, their fancy charging stations dead. Corinne's beloved clubhouse was shut down, its Wi-Fi, security systems, and office computers completely offline. Then came the HOA board emergency meeting, which was held outside since the clubhouse was too hot to sit in. Jack watched from afar as Karen and her minions frantically debated their next move, not realizing that the very man who held the solution was sitting right down the street, grinning ear to ear. By mid-morning, a desperate Karen marched toward Jack's house, her usual confidence replaced by barely concealed rage and desperation. Jack leaned against his porch railing, waiting for the inevitable. "Jack Dawson," she barked, marching up his driveway like she owned the place. Jack took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Mornin', Karen. Lovely day, isn't it?" Karen's face was flushed with frustration. "Don't play games with me. The entire neighborhood has been without power for hours. We've contacted the electric company and they said," she swallowed hard, "they said the issue is not on their end." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Huh, that's so." Karen folded her arms, glaring. "Cut the crap, Jack. We know you did this." Jack smiled, now she was getting it. "Oh, I didn't do anything, Karen," he said smoothly. "But I did enforce a contract. You know, kinda like how you enforced that 500% increase in my HOA dues." Karen's mouth opened slightly, realization dawning on her face. Jack took another sip of coffee. "You raised my fees without warning, so I figured it was only fair to adjust the terms of our agreement. No power until we renegotiate." Karen's jaw clenched, she was stuck. And Jack was enjoying every second of it. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red as she sputtered, trying to come up with a response. Jack could see the war raging in her mind. She wanted to scream, threaten, and demand, but she also knew she was standing on very shaky ground. Finally, she straightened her blazer, forcing a strained smile. "Jack, be reasonable. You can't just shut off power to an entire community." Jack chuckled. "Oh, but I can, Karen. See, unlike you, I actually read contracts before I go around abusing my authority. And according to the agreement your HOA conveniently forgot about, I have full control over the power supply. Which means," he gestured vaguely toward the darkened houses behind her, "this is completely within my rights." Karen's eye twitched. "This is extortion." Jack shrugged. "Call it what you want, but it's perfectly legal, which is a hell of a lot more than I can say about your little 500% dues hike." She flinched. She knew he had her. A few of her HOA board members had gathered nearby, whispering amongst themselves. Some looked worried, others downright furious. One of them, a balding man in a polo shirt, finally stepped forward. "Karen, maybe we should, work something out." Karen whipped around, glaring at him. "Are you serious? He's holding us hostage. We can't negotiate with him." Jack laughed. "Oh, you mean the way you didn't negotiate when you decided to rob me blind?" He leaned in slightly. "How's that working out for you?" Karen gritted her teeth, but she was losing her audience. The neighborhood's wealthiest residents were not happy, and they weren't about to suffer in the heat just so Karen could stroke her overinflated ego. Then came the breaking point. A voice called out from the crowd. "Enough, Karen, just fix it." Karen froze. Her biggest supporters, the ones who usually worshipped her HOA rules, were turning on her. More voices joined in. "Oh, we pay too much to live like this. I have a business meeting in an hour. I can't even charge my laptop. I have frozen lobster in my fridge, and if it spoils, someone's paying for it." Karen's shoulders tensed. She was losing control. Jack smirked. "Tell you what, Karen, I'll be nice. Let's make a deal." She whirled back around, looking at him with pure hatred. "What do you want?" Jack grinned. "First, that 500% dues increase. Gone. You'll put every homeowner's fees back to what they were." Karen's nostrils flared. "And if I do?" Jack leaned against his porch railing. "Well, I hope you enjoy sweating through the night. Oh, and you might want to warn people their security systems won't work, or their garage doors, or their electric fences." Karen's eye twitched again. She knew she had lost. Jack took another slow sip of coffee, waiting for her to crack. Karen stood there, fuming, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Jack could practically see the steam rising off her head. but as much as she wanted to fight back, she knew she was cornered. The residents were getting angrier by the second. People were fanning themselves with HOA newsletters. Some were sweating through their overpriced golf shirts, and one guy was even melting ice cubes on his forehead. The rich folk who had once blindly followed Karen were now on the verge of mutiny. "Karen," one of the board members muttered, "just do it." Karen's lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. "Fine," she spat through gritted teeth. "We'll remove the fee increase." Jack smirked, "Good start." Karen stiffened, "Start." Jack crossed his arms. "Oh, we're not done, sweetheart. See, I don't just want the dues lowered. I want a full refund for what you've already taken. Every single resident gets their money back." A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. "Damn right," one guy called. "I want my money yesterday." Karen looked like she wanted to explode. "That's impossible," she hissed. "The funds have already been allocated to community improvements." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean like the $50,000 fountain you installed outside the clubhouse? The one that's just sitting there, looking real useless without power?" Karen's jaw tightened. Jack chuckled. "Yeah, about that. I checked the HOA's last few financial reports. Funny thing, I didn't see any actual improvements listed, just a bunch of mysterious administrative expenses." His smirk widened. "Sure would be a shame if someone reported that to the county. HOA fraud is a serious offense." The board members shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances. The residents murmured amongst themselves. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was slipping fast. Jack shrugged. "Tell you what, you start the refund process today and I won't go digging any deeper." Karen's hands shook with rage, but she had no choice. "Fine," she snapped. Jack grinned, "Checkmate." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket and handed it to Karen. "Just sign this agreement, making it all official, and I'll have the power back on in 10 minutes. Karen snatched the paper, reading through gritted teeth. It clearly outlined: 1. Immediate cancellation of the 500% dues increase. 2. A full refund of all extra fees charged. 3. A written apology to every HOA resident. 4. No future increases without a community vote. Karen's hands trembled with fury as she signed. Jack took the paper, folded it neatly, and tipped his hat. "Pleasure doing business with you, Karen." Then, whistling to himself, he strolled back inside, while Karen stood there, humiliated and defeated. Jack took his time. He made himself another cup of coffee, walked over to his private substation, and casually flipped the power back on, as if he had all the time in the world. The entire neighborhood roared to life. Air conditioners hummed back on, porch lights flickered, and garage doors whirred open. Inside their homes, residents could finally charge their devices, check their emails, and stop sweating through their expensive linen shirts. From his porch, Jack watched Karen and her defeated HOA board shuffle back toward the clubhouse. She looked absolutely livid, but she knew better than to say another word. Jack smirked and called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Karen, don't forget that refund. You wouldn't want the county poking around your books, would ya?" Karen stiffened, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she stormed off in silence, her board members trailing behind her like scolded children. A few neighbors clapped. One guy, still holding a bag of half-melted ice, gave Jack a thumbs up. Jack chuckled, now that was satisfying. But he wasn't done just yet. Karen might have signed the agreement, but Jack knew her type. She would try to weasel her way out of the refund somehow. So he sent copies of their signed deal to every single HOA resident, along with a little note. "If you don't see your refund within the next 30 days, contact the County Fraud Investigation Office at the number below." By the next morning, the HOA office was bombarded with angry phone calls. Residents wanted their money, and they wanted it now. Karen was officially trapped. Jack leaned back in his chair, a satisfied grin on his face. She had tried to squeeze him dry. Now she was the one scrambling to keep control. Karen was drowning in chaos. For the first time in her reign as HOA president, she wasn't the one giving orders, she was the one taking them. And the people barking at her, her own furious residents. The HOA office was a war zone. Phone lines rang non-stop, and angry homeowners lined up outside the clubhouse, demanding their refunds. The very people who once worshipped Karen's rules were now turning on her, their patience completely burned out. Jack had a front row seat to the disaster. He sat on his porch, watching Karen attempt to calm a crowd of well-dressed but furious residents. "I assure you the refund process is underway," she said through gritted teeth, forcing a fake smile. "We just need time to reallocate the budget." "Time," one woman snapped. "You took our money overnight, but now we have to wait." A man in a golf shirt crossed his arms. "We checked with the county. You don't have the authority to raise fees without a vote, so either we get our money back or we get a lawyer." Karen visibly paled. Jack grinned. Oh, this was beautiful. Her usual smug confidence had been completely shattered. Every time she tried to assert control, someone shut her down. And now, with the county watching her every move, she couldn't pull her usual under-the-table tricks to stall or cover things up. By the afternoon, her own board members had turned against her. Jack spotted them having a heated argument near the clubhouse entrance. One man jabbed a finger in Karen's face. Another woman threw her hands up in frustration and walked away. A third board member just shook his head, muttering, "We never should have let you raise those fees." Jack chuckled to himself. Karen had spent years bullying homeowners, enforcing ridiculous fines, and treating herself like royalty. Now, she was watching her little empire collapse around her. And Jack. He had one last move to play. Karen's downfall came faster than Jack expected. Within a week, the HOA board had completely turned on her. The final straw? The county launched an official investigation into the HOA's finances, thanks to the overwhelming number of complaints filed by angry residents. It turned out Karen had been skimming money from the HOA for years, covering it up under administrative costs and community projects that never actually happened. When the county auditors showed up at the clubhouse, Karen lost it. "This is a mistake," she shrieked, waving her arms like a madwoman. "I was improving the neighborhood, you can't just—" "We can, ma'am," the investigator interrupted, handing her a notice of investigation. "You're being audited for financial misconduct. I suggest you cooperate." Jack was having the time of his life. He casually strolled up, hands in his pockets. "Tough break, Karen," he said, barely hiding his smirk. "Seems like power's a tricky thing to hold on to, huh?" Karen whipped around, eyes blazing with pure hatred. "This is your fault." Jack shrugged. "Nah, this is your fault. All I did was remind you what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." Karen's reputation was ruined. The HOA board voted her out within days. The county froze HOA funds until the audit was complete. Refunds were issued immediately, straight from Karen's beloved HOA emergency fund. But the best part, Karen's personal bank accounts were flagged for investigation. Turns out, she had been using HOA money to pay for personal expenses, including first-class vacations, expensive jewelry, and a ridiculous amount of spa treatments. Jack leaned back on his porch as the neighborhood celebrated her downfall. The same people who once feared her were now laughing at her expense. And Karen. She packed up her things and left the neighborhood in disgrace. Jack smirked, tipping his hat as she drove past his house for the last time. "Don't let the gate hit you on the way out, Karen." With Karen gone and the HOA in shambles, the neighborhood finally returned to peace. And Jack. He never paid another dime in HOA fees again.